There's a myriad of ways that your body attempts to accommodate how you sit, stand, and really move throughout the course of the day. And something that you may have noticed, and probably why you're watching this video, is because one day you got up, you looked in front of the mirror, and you noticed that one part of your body was more asymmetrical than the rest. Although aesthetically this isn't the most pleasing, asymmetries are inherently built into our system. When you look at the placement of your organs as an example, you probably know that your heart will bias slightly your left, your liver actually biases a little bit of your right, and there's even some built-in asymmetry to how your diaphragm sits and is positioned. And unless you fall into the sub 1% of the population that is truly ambidextrous, then you likely already bias or utilize one side of your body more so than the other. So is asymmetry necessarily bad? No, absolutely not. But, and there is a but, when we begin to overly compensate through these asymmetries and we start to lose the capacity to go through ranges of motion and we lose movement variability through other parts of our body, this can lead to issues downstream. An example of this would be that, say I am biased to my right side. My hips are rotated to my right, my trunk is tilted to my right, and I'm bearing most of my weight through my right foot. Now there's nothing inherently wrong with being in this position and producing force, we'll say, from it. But let's say hypothetically that one day my child is quickly running by and I have to go and pick them up from this left side. Or it's slippery outside and I gotta go and catch myself on this left side. If I am biased to my right for say a decade and I don't exercise, I don't really have much of a movement routine, and then I'm all of a sudden asking my body to do this, how well prepared do you think my body is to receive those types of forces? And the answer to that is simply, my body isn't adequately prepared to receive the forces through that left side. And this is where having a strong level of asymmetry can be an issue. So it's not so much that being in this right side bias is inherently bad, but it's really having the lack of capacity to work well from this left side as well. And this is what I see a lot of the time when I'm working with people who have dealt with injury or trauma to a particular area, is their body will tend to shy away from particular positions and the tensions involved to keep them there. So whether you're dealing with pain, you want to improve the quality of your movement, or maybe you just want to better present yourself posturally, this video is going to have some golden nuggets for you. So one area that I think almost everyone can improve on and kind of get a sense or a feel for is getting used to being suspended in a little bit more of an upright position and just getting this felt sense of what it feels like to be in a more posturally upright position. Whether you're dealing with some level of asymmetry, we'll say through your shoulders or your ribs, learning how to get a little bit more vertical is going to help to benefit you to not only keep yourself suspended here, but also we're going to go through a breathing exercise that's just going to help to give you a sense of what having some integrity in this position feels like. If you are dealing with a really strong asymmetry, we'll say of your shoulders, where you're like this, one thing that I'm going to want you to be mindful of is that as you kind of tilt or bring your structure back to neutral, it may feel as if your body is way over this way. And although that's going to be the feel of it, it may actually be what is taking you a little bit closer to neutral. So what I might suggest is either setting up a recording system so you can kind of see some video feedback, or maybe sit in front of a mirror so you can just kind of get used to where your joints are. So how we are going to work through this is in a seated position. So all you're going to need is a chair. And what we're going to work on is just taking your hands, we'll go on your knuckles. So you're going to make a small fist. You're going to take them slightly behind you. And I mean, just a little bit. We don't have to go all the way here where we're in a lot of retraction of the shoulder blades. We're just going to come kind of slightly behind the hips. And what we're going to work on is almost a pressing down motion through the chair. But as you do that, what I want you to try to sense is that you're lifting the upper ribs at the same time. So through the action of me gently pressing down, I'm trying to work on this lifting of the upper ribs. Now this is gonna give you a sense of what that upright position feels like. And again, you're gonna wanna be conscientious that you're not doing anything asymmetrical here that could be feeding the bias that you already have. So try to have some sense of where neutral is. And then once we're here, we're gonna start to work a slow breathing cycle where we're gonna draw the breath ideally from the pelvis, and we're gonna start to work a expansive inhale into the ribs. So we're gonna take about 70 to 80% of the breath in through the abdominal wall. And how you can imagine this is you're gonna breathe down into the pelvic floor. We're gonna create some expansion, and then we're gonna start to draw the breath upward, finishing that last 20 to about 25% of the breath in through the ribs. So what this is gonna look like is I'm creating a little bit of that press down, I'm lifting the upper ribs. This is how we're gonna get what's called thoracic extension. Once I'm in this upright position, I'm gonna start to work that breath. It's gonna look something like this. Now I'm a little bit more expanded, and on that exhale, ever so slightly, we're gonna just allow the lower abdomen to gently draw back through a little bit of contraction. And as you can see, I didn't allow my structure to recollapse. I tried to keep the height that was created from that inhale. The inhale is gonna be what allows you to get that sense of being suspended, that sense of space. And then can we just continue to build on that with each consecutive inhale? So then I'll take another breath in. Now be mindful here that you're not excessively going forward with the ribs where you could potentially be feeding a rib flare. We do want to try to keep that somewhat compact, and that's why we're working that breath first drawing down and then kind of smoothly drawing the breath back up from there. I would recommend spending anywhere between about 60 to 90 seconds here, working that full breathing cycle, trying to get as much expansion as you can, and work through that for a total of 2 rounds. So an area where people are most commonly dealing with a pretty strong asymmetry in my experience is through the hips, whether that be with a rotation, a shift. All these things can be very common, and it's something that I often see in my practice. So what we're gonna work on is not so much just getting rid of this asymmetry, because I don't know if that's even entirely possible, but we are gonna try to provide our body some underlying capacity to get used to shifting to the opposing side that we may be biasing from. So a lot of people will tend to be more biased to the right for a multitude of reasons that we're not gonna get into in this video, but most people do tend to exist more in this right side bias. So what we can do is get familiar with rotating and getting seated into this left leg. It's not to say that we don't want to do any right side work. We definitely do, but I would encourage you to start getting more familiar with what it feels like to have weight and being planted through this left leg. And how we're going to do that is through a hip extension exercise. So as you can see, I have a dowel here. You can use a dowel, you can use a wall, you can use a broomstick, a countertop, anything kind of around you to have some stability is going to work here. Now what we are going to first work on is getting seated back, in this case, into my left hip. And I want to give you a quick demonstration of what that looks like and some potential ways that people will often compensate. So we're going to start by finding weight through this left foot. So I don't really have much weight through my right foot here in this case. I'm trying to have about 80 to 90% of weight on my left foot, and ideally through the midfoot is kind of what we're looking for. Maybe biasing the heel here ever so slightly is okay as well. And what we're going to start to do is work a rotation back into this left hip without shifting weight over to this right side, because this will be how your body is going to try to find its way back to that right side. So let's be mindful that we're sitting this left hip bone right on this backside, straight back. Once we're in kind of this seated position, you have some weight planted in through there. You're gonna set up your dowel. It can be on your countertop, whatever works. And what we're gonna start to do is add a lift of my right foot in this case, and we're gonna add a reach of this right leg. So as my right foot goes back, I'm gonna sit a little bit more into this left hip. And now we're gonna hold this hip rotation. We're gonna let this right leg come all the way back up. The hips are gonna come to neutral, as you can see here. I'm not dumping my structure. I'm trying to keep some of that height from our first exercise. And then we're gonna repeat this. So my right leg is gonna start to go. I'm gonna re-find that rotation and that sitting back motion into this left leg. And what you are likely to feel here and should feel is a nice stretch, kind of through the hamstrings, the gluteal fold, maybe even through the glutes here as well. And you're just trying to get a sense for what that stretch feels like as you work to and from these different ranges of motion. I'd work about 3 to 5 seconds on this kick back, a little bit of a hold, and then 3 to 5 seconds coming back up. Work through this for anywhere between about 8 to 12 repetitions. There's no rush here, and really try to manage your weight through that lead leg. This here is just a last resort of stability. I'm not hanging on for dear life when I'm here. I'm trying to just have this as a last resort of stability. So get familiar with being seated in through that foot and kind of exploring these different ranges of motion as you work that hip rotation into your left side. Of course, work your right here as well. So by now we have a felt sense of what it feels like to be a little bit more upright with our upper body. We got a sense of what it feels like to be rotated into each hip. And kind of the last piece here that we can start to mix in is adding a little bit of movement and rhythm to it. So I'm gonna grab a kettlebell. You can use a kettlebell, dumbbell, even a water bottle would work here as well. We're gonna take that same hinging pattern that we were working on in our previous exercise. We're just gonna work a swing and we're gonna alternate to the opposing side. So I'm gonna do a swing back, I'm gonna switch, and then I'm gonna go to the opposite side. And what we're getting used to here is this action of momentum trying to pull me one way and having to receive that momentum in through the hips. And here, you can just be slightly mindful of where, we'll say, your shoulders are in space. So you can see here that I am asymmetrical, and this is actually okay. This is where we would want to be when I'm loaded into my right side. So if my shoulders are always here, then chances are this is probably where you live a lot of the time. But if I go over to my left, you're gonna see I get that same sort of counterbalance coming back this way. So we can work on this sense of where our body is in space with the momentum kind of carrying us from one side to the other. And this will start to give you a good indication of what the feedback feels like when you're transferring weight from one foot to the other. What I'd recommend here as you're going through this is going through anywhere between about 15 to 20 reps. We want to have a good amount of volume here and really try to emphasize loading into the hips and getting used to capturing momentum as you kind of work that from side to side. So when it comes to structural asymmetry, is that inherently a bad thing? No, it's not. But it can become a problem if we are overly reliant on where our compensations and our biases may be. And this is why it's important to work through things like full range of motion, working things where we are maybe only working one side of our body at a time and where things aren't always bilateral, because we do want to start to get this felt sense of what weight, momentum, position, and tension feel like as we work through any type of movement. So hopefully you learned a thing or two as it relates to getting yourself maybe a little bit more posturally upright or dealing with any type of asymmetry through your shoulders or maybe in through your hips. If you did, then you could do all the YouTube things. You can like, subscribe for more content like this, and go check out another video I did on the body in some way that the YouTube algorithm thinks you will appreciate right here. I'll see you there.